should introduce myself. My name is Maitreyabandhu. I wasn't here last week. Did you notice? Yeah. Okay. I was at a 6-day meeting. Buddhists do a lot of meetings. Good heavens, 6 days. Anyway, so before I say something about this week, I want to just say a little bit more about the groups. So in the groups, we've got these home groups every week, and you'll be meeting in a home group every week. If the group's very big, sometimes it's better to break the group into two, otherwise it gives you a bit more time to feed back. Really try and be really clear that what you're doing is saying, okay, what did you take on to do last week, and how did you get on with it? Yeah. What you're looking for when you're with your home practice is watch out for good intentions and something sort of difficult to know whether you've done it or not. Try and come up with each week 2 or 3 things that you're pretty sure you can do. What I sometimes recommend is think of 3 things that you're sure you can do and do 2 things. Yeah? So you think, I have to do 2. So do something that's really doable and that you can know whether you've done it or not. So this evening I'm going to be asking you to do a walking meditation practice every day. Very, very specific, and I'll get you to just talk about that at the end. And one of the issues will be, can you remember whether you're doing it or not? Yeah. So those groups are to really say, okay, in the end of tonight, I'll say, here's what we're going to do this week. Check in with a partner about how you're going to do that. And then next week, you're going to come back and tell your group how you got on. And you might need to remind your group what you said you were going to do, and then how you got on with that. Come in, yeah. And without being, as Abhayanandi said, without being overly self-critical in that kind of unhelpful way, but don't be too soft, just to balance it up. If you were going to the gym, you would say, "Oh, it's a bit heavy." You'd there'd be a bit more. Anyway, I don't go to the gym, but that's what I imagine happens. So you don't be too soft on yourself. Try and find that right kind of balance between stretching yourself, but not having. Mainly, it's to do with not having unrealistic expectations. And one of the things you're trying to do on this course is learn about your expectations. So, I remember the first time I did this course, people say, someone was saying, well, I'll go to bed every day by 10 o'clock, and I'll have turned off my computer by 9:30. And I thought, I bet you won't do that. Nowadays that feels almost, you may as well just be, be a hermit or something. It seems almost undoable, doesn't it? So what is doable? And then try and bring it a bit more in, yeah. And in that first week, particularly, I think it'd be good to carry that on this week. Is how could you set up your life so that it works better for you? It runs more smoothly. It's simpler. Don't worry too much about the tiny details. But if you don't open your bills, or if your room is a complete sort of mess and you can't find anything, you're always stressing out trying to find things, or your bag. It's a complete, you have to jump in to try and get anything. Look for those things that are making your life kind of slightly stressed and complex. Do you habitually turn up late for meetings and then get in that kind of fluster and all that sort of thing? Do you habitually go to bed too late? Can you pull that in? Yeah. Sounds really simple, but you're trying to take ownership of all that. Yeah? So last week we talked about integration. Well, you did, I didn't. I was talking about other things. So the first thing about integration, as Abhayanandi was saying, is that your first practice of integration is cultivating mindfulness. And that means primarily, first of all, noticing your mind in propuncture, which means spreading out, your mind spreading out into stories, fantasies, memories, planning, and trying to bring it back into your direct experience. Yeah? It's interesting that the actual etymology of the word propuncture means your hand. It means 5. So, but basically, you can imagine the Buddha saying, it's like your mind does that. You need to be all collected, but your mind spreads out, yeah, like that. Yeah? That's where the word probably comes from. So it's that tendency of your mind to be driven, unaware, largely unaware, when you're just thinking things without even knowing that you're thinking things. It's that experience you have when you drive to work and you get to work and you can't remember how you got there. It's driven, unaware, kind of hankering mind. Either a mind that's in a driven, unaware kind of way wanting something, or it's a driven, unaware not wanting something. And first thing to do in cultivating this first great stage of life, integration, is to notice your mind doing that and keep on stepping back out of that into direct experience. Otherwise, we live our lives in a highly constructed experience to do with our stories, our narratives about ourselves, our stories about other people, our great narratives about our life. Why is this always happening to me? All those kind of things. Yeah? We get stuck into highly constructed narratives. And what we need to do, first of all, is simplify. Come back to something much, much more direct so that we can start to free ourselves from these highly constructed narrative lives that we lead. Yeah? So that's the first thing that we were trying to emphasize. The second thing I want to talk about in this first stage of integration is, I don't quite know how to wind my way into this, so I'll have some water. Just pause for a minute. So really perhaps the second main thing to talk about is that this stage of integration is the stage of taking full responsibility for your life. Yeah? Easy to say, much more difficult to do than it looks. Yeah, taking full responsibility for your life, full responsibility for your mind. That your mind is yours. Yeah, it's not. It's your mind isn't on the strings of other people or the state or your boss or some group that you don't like, whatever the current grouping that you don't like is. Yeah, you're trying to, in this stage of integration, live your life from your own side. Yeah, try and take. I like to think of it as taking ownership of your life, taking full responsibility for your states of mind, particularly. Yeah. Now, this question of taking full responsibility is much more tricky than it sounds. Very often, what we experience, we think of it as to do with something out there. We do that probably instinctively. We don't think this is our mind. We think it's that over there. So, for instance, just to use a personal example, I've been away last week. I've got to go to another meeting next week, and so I've got this very sort of structured time before the time. And what I've been noticing is feeling a bit. I hope this isn't disappointing. Feeling a bit stressed. Feeling a bit. That horrible feeling like you're over timetabled, and kind of. but basically, it's like that, isn't it? All you need to do is make that sound. And it's very tempting to start to think, all these things are happening, therefore I am like this. Do you see what I mean? I've got these meetings, that meeting, this needs to be done. You look at your emails, and that needs to be addressed, and this needs to be done. And you see how it's very tempting to think, well, that it's to do with all that. Yeah? But actually, when I'm more honest about this week, I've also organised to see this person just because I like them. I actually foolishly agreed to review a book where I'm going to get time. It's my, that's, and I chose to do that. So what we do when we think, I've got all this, I'm really busy, all this stuff is happening, we're actually making a story, and by making a story, you're always editing the bits out that don't fit it. Actually, that bit, that was for fun, but I'm going to say that was a meeting. And then I met this person who was a friend of mine. We had coffee and a cake, and that was really busy. Then I had to walk upstairs. Weirdly, one can turn anything into this story about why you are so stressed, and there's so much things being demanded of you. So you being a bit anxious and a bit grumpy is completely reasonable. Yeah. So do you see that? It's a very obvious way, but do you see how what we're trying to do here is say, no, I have created this. Yeah. Like the fact that my week this week is over timetabled is because I timetabled in too much. It's not that some sort of alien has come down with a timetable that I've got to live out. I've over-timetabled it, yeah? So it's trying to take that on rather than live as if it's sort of happening to you. A sort of larger example of not taking or a habit of not taking responsibility is when we feel ourselves to be a victim of some sort. Very, very common, very, very seductive. I've done it myself. Very easy to feel a victim of someone or some grouping. It's difficult to get the tenor of this right because it's usually the thing, there's some truth in it, otherwise you couldn't run the story, you know. So, you know, I've talked about this before, but, you know, I've got 3 older brothers who I now dearly love, actually, but they used to be very cruel to me, and I definitely grew up with a sense of being victimised by them, and in a sense, they were, you know, overtly cruel. You know, my character's partly been shaped by that. Even now, it's created a kind of shape in my character, and I can notice if I'm, you know, tired or stressed or a bit grumpy, that comes in a bit more, easily feeling threatened a bit or something like that. Yeah. And I grew up very much with this sort of story of being victimised by my brothers. And you know what the trouble with that story is that you get sympathy for it. And I could, you know, talk when I first came along when I was 25. I'd talk about that, and everyone thought, "Oh God, it seems really difficult." But what I've particularly noticed is just how unhelpful that was. That story of being a victim, because actually I was also playing my part, but I didn't really. I was terribly sensitive. I still am, and I used to cry all the time. And I now know what it's like to have everybody else having a good time and one other person just whinging all the time and crying. It's just really irritating. But when you're that person, you just think, why don't people understand me? You know. But actually, it is frankly irritating, isn't it? But you see how it's easy to leave that out and just tell the story of being a victim. Yeah? So even if there are things that are against you, and there are against all of us, difficulties and all, as soon as we take up that sense of I'm sort of being victimised somehow, our life is being led from outside. Yeah? Actually, the real issue, you know, for me and historically, has been self-pity. That's what feeling a victim does. It makes you feel sorry for yourself. And that's terribly toxic. Very, very natural, very understandable. We all probably slip into it, but it's terribly toxic. What people do is they back off from you when you feel sorry for yourself. It doesn't work, does it? It's terribly toxic, but very easy to slip into. So instead of feeling a victim, we say, actually what's happening at the moment is I'm feeling sorry for myself. That's what's happening. Like when I look back at my brothers, what I should have done is hit one of them. Simple. Actually, I'm a bit smaller now, but wouldn't have hurt to have a go at least. You know, what I needed to have done is be much braver, and that's what I needed to learn. Yeah. So, in this stage of integration, it's about really owning your life, not saying it's caused by your boss or your brothers or I don't know, men or by women or by whatever it is that you create a kind of that makes me this state. It's quite natural to feel like that. I think we all get into that, don't we? Because of that, I'm like this. Because I've got this scheduled week, I'm a bit stressed and a bit grumpy. But you see how integration is saying, no, I'm a bit stressed and a bit grumpy. That's what I need to work on. That's my mind, yeah? So you can see that this first stage is actually very tough. It's about really being honest with yourself. I am at the moment feeling sorry for myself. I am at the moment feeling grumpy and stressed, and I've got an instinct to take that out on people. Very often happens, doesn't it, when you get stressed? It's not that you just get stressed, but you kind of vibe it out to others. This stage is asking us to really take ownership of our life. You know, that if you're in a bad mood, you're in a bad mood. So what are you going to do about it? I mean, the Buddha, I think, is really quite brutal in that way. He'd just sort of say, okay, that all this is happening to you, but what state of mind are you in? And what are you going to do about that? He wouldn't be very interested in what they did to you then in the past or in the present. He'd just say, here's your state of mind, here's your predicament, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to live in response to that? And that's trying to own your life, isn't it? That you run your life from your own side. Very, very difficult to do. But it's only then that you start to gain weight as a human being, I think. It's only then that you start to become substantial as a person. And this stage of integration is about the stage of sort of putting on psychic weight. When you meet people who are integrated, they have this sort of gravitas to them, this sort of weightiness to them. There's a lot of them present. They've owned their own life and their own mind. When you meet people who've got that very strongly, it's even slightly frightening because they're not very clubbable. They won't just sort of go along with things. They won't be rude if they're genuinely practicing. They won't be rude or kind of, just sort of brutish. But they very much live from their own life. They won't be pushed around so much. Another issue with this is our relationship to technology. Very, very difficult now, isn't it? That we need to take ownership of our own attention. Because if we don't own our attention, there's a whole worldwide web out there that wants to get our attention and manipulate it so that we buy things mainly, so that we download things, so that we do what other people want us to do. Yeah? So do you see how this stage is also about owning our attention so that we're not prey to the marketplace? Otherwise, the marketplace is becoming more and more sophisticated at getting you to want things and getting you to buy things, especially if you feel a bit bored, a bit kind of like empty. It's getting right into your palm of your hand, and all you need to do is use your thumb and you can buy things, download things, whatever it is. It's probably made this issue of integration more and more difficult, this issue of kind of taking responsibility for yourself more and more difficult. Another area to mention with this, I think, is thinking. This is something I've been thinking about more and more, is what we mean by thinking. So I think this stage of integration is also learning to think, which sounds straightforward enough. You can either think I'm already doing too much of that. But much of what we call thinking is prapuncture. That's why it's really important to have this Buddhist word prapuncture, because that doesn't translate to thinking, really. Thinking is what philosophers do. It's what it's a serious thing. Thinking. Yeah. It's when you think. It's really beautiful if you think. So one of the things we're trying to learn, I think, in this first stage is learning to think. And thinking is to do with, I think it's a lot to do with observing. You notice things and you think, gosh, there's something to think about that. It's not to do with thinking on the basis of previous thoughts you've had. It's to do with paying attention to life very deeply and observing things from that. So I was telling this little story on a retreat I did recently about my partner's daughter, my oldest daughter. I better not talk about this too much, but I've told it so many times, but we were doing this little game where she wanted to do this game where I was a doctor and she was a patient, and I thought, okay, let's do that, because she's a bit anxious, so I thought I'd try and find out some things. So, she knocked on the door, I said, hello, okay, come in. And she was only 9 then. And I said, what's your name? And she told me a fictitious name. I said, okay, how old are you? I'm 24. Have you got any children? Yes, I've got 3 children, 2 boys. Straight away, what's your job? I work in advertising. There she is. She was sort of 9, rattling it all off. I said, are you married? Yes, I'm married. I married 2 years ago. Is your relationship good? Yes, but we argue sometimes. It's fine. This perfect kind of game, And I was trying to find out a little bit about her anxiety. But I said, asked various questions, and I said, do you go on holiday? Yes, do you do this? Do you do that? And I said, do you take recreational drugs? As you do. She looked at me for a moment, and then she ducked slightly and said, what's recreational drugs? So I said, they're drugs that you take just for fun. No, I've taken them once. I've taken them once, but I don't want to do that. Okay, next question. But what struck me from that, so what I'm trying to get this matter of what thinking is, I was really struck by the fact that she whispered and that she literally ducked. She sort of went, "What's recreation?" Like she's trying to get below the camera. What's recreation? It's I told her in a stage whisper. Okay, we go. And no one had ever told her to do that. But she is pretending. And you know what pretending means. And you can't just say when you're pretending, sorry, I don't understand the question, because you're now out of character. So she had to do something instinctively to know that she's now out of character, because you've been in character. And to see that shows something very deep about us, that we are human beings who can pretend, and that we can create worlds by pretending. When you have Buddhist ritual, it's basically an adult pretending. If you pretend in the right way, all kinds of things can happen. Incredible things can happen. And children instinctively know how to do it. And they instinctively know that, I can't pretend through that, so I have to sort of somehow get out of it, ask what I need to know, like a prompt, and then go back into the pretend. And you have to do something physically to do that. Now, she doesn't know that. No one's told her that. But you see how it says a lot about what we human beings are, that we're creatures of imagination, that we can pretend and create whole worlds. And we're going to come on to that later in this course. That's going to be absolutely crucial to any human evolving and growing from now, is we're going to need to find this imagination. Yeah? So thinking is about observing and thinking into experience. It's especially not about ideological thinking. Ideological thinking, by definition, is not yours. It's off-the-shelf thinking. Trouble is, it's quite difficult to notice ideological thinking because it's sort of bread and butter to us. We don't really realise that the things that we're saying are actually ideological thinking. They're not our thinking. So, for instance, this idea you should think for yourself is not your idea. I can't remember which philosopher it was. I think it's Hume. That it's quite a recent idea that you should think for yourself. At least in England until recently, the thing to do was to worship God. It wasn't anything to do with thinking for yourself. So actually we think, I believe that. But actually it's just something that you picked up from the marketplace, really. So part of this first stage of integration is learning to think. And that means kind of trying to notice when your thinking is just ideology, things that you've picked up, either from your parents or from the milieu that you walk in, or the guardian, or whatever it is. It's very easy just to pick up ideological thinking. And it's not yours by definition. Yeah? I was reading something that Marilyn Robinson wrote, which I think she's one of the... If there is a great novelist now, it's Marilyn Robinson, I think. Wonderful novels. And she's just written a series of essays. She's very strongly a theological thinker. She's a very committed Christian. But she was talking about ideological thinking and saying it's a betrayal of the magnificence of your mind. You've got this wonderful mind, this incredible magnificence. She was saying, and there's all this culture that you can draw on to enrich your mind. And she said that ideological thinking is a kind of turning around that you should never do. Yeah. So part of this first stage is trying to learn how to think. One of the ways of doing that is reading people who think, or talking to people who are actually thinking, not just reiterating whatever the current zeitgeist is. Which, if nothing else, if you're attentive, you'll notice it's a bit boring because you already kind of know it all, and you're just sort of saying it to each other. It's not really a communication; it's just reiteration of a kind of zeitgeist. Like if you read Jane Austen, they always talk about large houses and horse riding or whatever it is, and now we've got our own things that we always talk about, and Jane Austen just takes the mickey out of everyone. And anyway, so part of this kind of taking ownership of our life is taking ownership of our capacity to think, which is a great value we have, but it's very often distorted by ideological thinking. Very, very difficult to actually be completely free of it, I think. It's a state of great maturity not to be just sort of caught up in some kind of ideological thinking. because thinking is actually quite hard to do. You need to be very self-possessed to think. It's a beautiful thing to do, but it's quite hard to do. Much harder than it's cracked up to be. So those are the main things I think I wanted to say tonight, is that this integration that we're talking about is this taking full ownership of your life. That my mental states are mine, and that I have this instinct to blame them on other people, or blame them on my diary, or resent people. Very, very deep. I have it, you have it. That somehow your states of mind are not yours, they're caused from someone else. And you see, as soon as you do that, even if it's, in a certain sense, there's truth in it, you make yourself passive. Because it means that the solution to your life is somewhere else. And you actually can't do you can't do much about other people. You can't change your boss, you can't change the government, probably. But you can change your life, you can change your mind. But you can't change your mind until you own it. And it's quite a tough practice, I find. Sometimes I have to really say, no, Maitreyabandhu, this is your state of mind. You need to gradually work out because quite often I find that in taking ownership of my state of mind, I start to learn what I need to say to you. Yeah? I've got a friend at the moment I feel a bit unhappy with, and I've been feeling that for a while, and I've not known quite why. And I've been trying to own, well, what am I doing? And there is something to say to them. But I'm going to be able to be much more effective when I come to say to them, because I've taken ownership of what's going on for me. I'm not trying to sort of reduce everything to you. One of the things we need to learn, I think, from this first stage is learning bravery. Learning that, okay, this is me, but actually I need to say that. Yeah? I need to tell the truth about that. I keep evading that, and that's not going to help me, and it's really not going to help them. I need to find a way of doing that that's really helpful, not critical or harsh, because it just doesn't work. But if I don't stop to tell the truth, I just end up resenting people. Yeah? So that's a much tougher way of thinking about this first stage. It's just taking full responsibility for our mind. That's how we deepen, that's how we start to change our life, is that we own our life. Yeah? So I'll just say a little bit about how we're going to do some home practice this week, and then we'll get into pairs and talk about how you're going to do that. So the first thing in terms of practice really recapitulates last week. So what I'd like to ask you to do from tomorrow onwards is do a daily walking meditation. Yeah? By which I simply mean a walk you already do, which you turn into a walking meditation practice. Yeah? So I'll just say a bit more about what I mean by that. So, say I actually don't commute, but say I was commuting from the Bethnal Green Tube, I would then turn that walk from my room up there, down the stairs, all the way along to my Oyster Card in Bethnal Green. Yeah? So that would be my mindful walk. Yeah? It needs to be about, 10 minutes, somewhere around that. No longer than 20 minutes, because that's too ambitious. And no less, if it's like 3 minutes, that's nothing, yeah. Try and think of a walk you do every day. Don't sort of do a special mindful walk, because you won't be able to carry that on. Don't think, oh yes, I'm going to walk, and you don't need to walk really slowly. And meanwhile, your boss is wondering where you are. You're just walking as you normally walk, but you're going to use that as your opportunity to keep on noticing your mind spreading out into propuncture and keep gathering it back into your body, into the direct sensations of your body. I write about this in the book, so I don't need to reiterate it all now. But see if you can do one mindful walk every day. Some of you already think, no, but hang on, I don't walk anywhere. So it might be the first 10 minutes of your cycle ride. How are you going to know that? So it might be from those traffic lights to wherever it is, St Paul's, wherever it is that you notice. Some people's routine changes a lot, so you might need to think of creative ways of how you could do this every day. But basically what it is something you're already doing, that involves your body moving around. So if anyway, think of that, and you're just going to keep on noticing your mind going off in propuncture, mental proliferation, and just keep on coming back to the body. Yeah, really, really simple, because that's your first practice to how you actually cultivate this integration. That's your first practice of how you actually take ownership for your life, is you start to notice that you're alive. You start to think, here I am. I'm not off in this. This fantasy is just it's a nothing world, isn't it? You can be lost in a fantasy, and the moment you come around, you can't even remember what you were thinking about. You were completely absorbed in it. Something wakes you out of it, and you can't even remember what it was. So that's your life gone. All that time's just gone, yeah? So you're trying to just notice that, and without making a big deal of it, just come back to your body. And you don't have to come back to your body in this kind of specially spiritual way. You just notice your feet on the ground, notice whether you feel comfortable or not, notice your coat on you. Come back, draw your mind in, so you start to do that. You start to gather the mind back into your body. So you're living more as a creature rather than a sort of head on a stick. Yeah? So in a minute we'll talk about how you do that. Seem to be in one of those moods today, don't I? I told you I was a bit stressed. What else? Right, that was the first thing. And then see if you can do a breathing space 3 times a day. Carry on. I think you were doing that last week, so carry on doing that. Again, I've written about the breathing space. So it might be something that you do on the bus. It might be something you have to go to the loo to do it. See if you can just have this about 3-minute breathing space 3 times a day if you can. We're going to try to build up things very gradually. That's very doable. So you can definitely do that. You can have 3 minutes 3 times a day where you feel your body, just tune into your breath a bit, notice how you're feeling in the body. Just gather yourself again. But in this first stage, it's all about gathering. The original term for this is translated as gathering. It's a stage of gathering. So you're just gathering yourself back into your own life, rather than giving it to other people and feeling a victim of that, or rather than blaming the state or your boss. Or all that. You're trying to gather your life back to you. Yeah? That's the meaning of it. So those are the main things. See if you can do a breathing space 3 times a day. And again, in pairs, you might want to, how are you actually going to do that? When are you going to do it? Try and be as specific as possible. Is that going to be doable? Where are you going to be able to do that? What's this mindful walk going to be? Literally, where does it start? So if it was me, does it start as I come down the stairs, or does it start as I leave the house? Yeah? Does it finish when I put my Oyster card on the reader, or does it, where does it finish? Yeah? Be really clear about where it starts and where it stops. So you really know whether you've done it or not. Those are 2 main things. Something I would recommend that you plan in, you might not be able to do this in this week, is see if you can create a situation where you can give your life story. That sounds a bit big, doesn't it? You think, whoa. So one of the ways in which we cultivate integration is telling the story of our life a bit. Yeah? I just did it last night. We had a group that I started last night, and we're starting with just doing life stories, just short life stories, 15 minutes or so. So what you're trying to do in the life stories, you're just trying to say, here's what happened. Here's my story of it, at least. Actually, what I've noticed, I've been doing life stories, 26, 27 years, and I've noticed that my life story changes. As you change, it's not just that your future changes, your present changes. Weirdly, your past changes. So I used to tell my life story all about how awful my brothers were. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just not interested in that anymore. I can think of all these other things that used to be edited out by that story. Your life story is a story. Yeah? By the nature of a story, to tell something, you have to say, tell that, but not that, don't you? It's always worth looking for the things that you like not to tell, because they're disintegrating you. Yeah? So if you've got, perhaps a friend who comes along to the centre here, or just 1 or 2 of you, you might just get a date. Say, okay, let's just meet up for an hour, and I'll tell you my life story in half an hour, and you tell me your life story in half an hour. It's just a way of kind of saying this has been my life. This is my story of my life, at least. Sometimes when you tell it out loud, if you're attentive, you start to think, Well, that's one way, but you start to notice this, and quite interestingly, when you listen to somebody else's life story, you think, gosh, that's true of me as well. You start to feel this connection with other people. Yeah? So if you can, you're not always possible to, and don't force it upon your flatmates. Don't go ahead to that and say, right there, guys, stop partying. Life stories. Okay, you first. Don't force it on the unwilling. But if you can, see if you can get a situation where you just spend a bit of time telling your life story. That helps integrate us. It helps own the story of our life like these. Okay, so let's just pair up or go into twos or threes with those nearest to you. So you need to think about how you're going to do the walking meditation, how you're going to do the breathing space, and is there any chance that you might do a life story? The other thing you can do with a life story is just spend some time. Some people do morning papers, don't they? Just write the story yourself. You can write it. It's another way of doing it. Okay. So let's just gather into twos or threes, and I'll ring a bell at the end.